why it sucked to be a medieval blacksmith, and more. To the countless nameless blacksmiths throughout history who toiled in the heat and grime, whose hands were perpetually blistered, whose lungs were perpetually filled with coal dust, and whose patience was perpetually tested by unreasonable clients demanding miracles for a pittance. This book is dedicated to you, the unsung heroes, or perhaps more accurately, the unsung villains, depending on the client's perspective, of medieval metalworking. May your hammers be ever sharp, your bellows ever strong, and your ale ever plentiful. And may your customers finally learn the inherent value of a properly tempered blade, lest they continue to suffer the consequences of their miserly ways. Although, let's be honest, the irony of a poorly made sword leading to a painful end for a cheapskate is a darkly amusing form of poetic justice, isn't it? This is, after all, dedicated to a profession that has long understood the dark, twisted humor inherent in the balance between life and death. A perfectly forged sword can save a life, and a poorly forged one can dramatically shorten it. The fine line between those two destinies is a tightrope walked daily by every blacksmith, and we raise a tankard, or perhaps a slightly dented mug, given the blacksmith's notoriously loose grip on his belongings, to you all. This book is not just a story of blacksmithing. It is an homage to the endurance, skill, and, let's be honest, stubborn resilience required to survive such a challenging and occasionally hilarious profession in an era where health and safety was basically a joke whispered only in the darkest corners of the tavern. May the memories of sparks, soot, and slightly singed eyebrows warm your heart and forge a smile on your face. Chapter 1, The Crucible of Despair, the first sliver of light, a pale imitation of the sun, barely pierced the grimy windows of my forge. Another day, another agonizing symphony of clang and groan about to commence. My bones ached before I even stirred, a familiar chorus of protests from years spent wrestling with molten metal and the capricious whims of fate, or more accurately, the capricious whims of my clients. Sleep, that elusive mistress, had offered me only a fleeting, fitful embrace, filled with nightmares of warped steel and irate nobles demanding impossibly sharp swords for the price of a loaf of bread. The air hung thick and heavy, already carrying the acrid tang of coal smoke and the metallic scent of iron. My lungs, seasoned veterans of this daily assault, wheezed a reluctant greeting to the day. I stretched, the familiar crackle of joints, a testament to my dedication to the craft, or perhaps a better testament to my stubborn refusal to retire to a life of quiet desperation, even if the quiet desperation often felt more appealing than another day in the forge. My first task, as always, was to coax the fire into life. It wasn't simply a matter of striking a flint. It was a ritual, a dance between man and element, a negotiation with the very heart of the earth. The bellows, a beast of leather and wood, demanded my full attention. Each heave of my chest, each controlled burst of air, fed the flames, transforming the inert coal into a roaring furnace, a hungry maw awaiting its iron feast. The heat radiated outwards, a tangible wave that washed over me, penetrating my thick leather apron and warming my already sweating skin. The tools laid before me, my trusty hammer, its head worn smooth by countless strikes, testament to the countless objects it had helped bring into existence. The anvil, its surface scarred and pitted, a record of its own long and hard-fought life. And the tongs, their jaws patiently awaiting the next piece of incandescent metal. These weren't mere tools. They were extensions of myself, familiar weights in my hands, each responding to the subtle nuances of my touch. They whispered stories of generations past, of masters who had wielded them before me, their skill and sweat imbued within the very grain of the metal. They were witnesses to the countless blades I had forged, the tools I'd shaped, the lives I'd inadvertently touched. The process was repetitive, yet each step demanded precision, a delicate balance of brute force and careful control. A single slip of the hammer could ruin hours of work, sending a perfectly shaped blade back to the fiery embrace of the forge, a testament to the unforgiving nature of the craft and the short temper of the metal. I'd seen apprentices reduced to tears by a misplaced strike, their dreams crumbling under the weight of glowing steel. I, however, had long ago mastered the art of suppressing my own frustrations, or at least masking them behind a veneer of gruff indifference. Today's task was a particularly tedious one, a batch of plowshares for Farmer Giles, a man whose complaining was only outweighed by his miserly nature. He'd haggled over the price like a merchant selling rotten turnips, and his constant grumbling about the quality of last year's shares haunted my dreams. I suspected he was using the same plows to till his fields as his great-great-grandfather, which was either exceptionally impressive or exceptionally foolish, depending on your perspective. I leaned toward foolish, particularly given the state of the darn things, when he finally brought them in. As I hammered away, shaping the iron into the requisite form, my mind wandered. I reflected on the irony of my situation. I, Thomas, the blacksmith, the master of fire and steel, reduced to shaping plowshares for a grumpy farmer. The image tickled a wry smile to my lips, a rare display of mirth in my usually grim visage. Then came the inevitable interruption. The rhythmic clang of my hammer was shattered by the abrupt squeak of the forge door. A figure silhouetted against the morning light, clad in the ill-fitting finery of a minor noble, stood there. Lord Elmsworth, if I recall correctly, his face a mask of entitled impatience. "Blacksmith?" he bellowed, his voice echoing the arrogance of his lineage. "I require a new sword, a masterpiece naturally, and I expect it finished before sunset." My internal monologue devolved into a furious stream of curses, suppressed only by years of learned self-control and the grim knowledge that insulting a nobleman could result in a swift and painful demise, usually involving a rather damp dungeon and inadequate rations. His specifications were, of course, absurd. He wanted a blade of impossible sharpness, a weight that defied physics, and an ornate hilt encrusted with jewels that would bankrupt a small village, all for the equivalent of a couple of weeks' worth of my meager earnings. The sheer audacity of the request sparked a sudden surge of anger, but years of experience had taught me to respond with a carefully crafted expression of polite, yet utterly unconvinced interest. "Of course, my lord," I said, my voice betraying none of the sarcasm churning within. "A masterpiece, as you request. However, such exquisite craftsmanship requires a commensurate investment. perhaps we could discuss the appropriate compensation. The ensuing haggling was a grueling exercise in patience, a carefully choreographed dance between my carefully masked disdain and his unwavering entitlement. Ultimately, he agreed to a price that barely covered the cost of the materials, but at least the wretched thing wouldn't be adorned with enough gems to blind a dragon. My blood pressure, however, remained dangerously elevated. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of sweat, sparks, and near misses. The intense heat sapped my energy, turning my movements sluggish and my thoughts heavy. I battled the ever-present threat of burns, dodging flying sparks and the occasional errant piece of molten metal. The smell of burnt flesh was never far from my nostrils, a constant reminder of the inherent dangers of my profession. Even with years of experience, the risk never truly faded. It was simply another facet of a life forged in fire. By nightfall, I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind weary. Yet, despite the unrelenting toil, a strange sense of satisfaction settled upon me. The rhythmic pounding of the hammer, the satisfying transformation of raw iron into something beautiful and functional, brought a muted contentment amidst the physical and mental exhaustion. As I finally locked up the forge, the remnants of the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues, I headed to the tavern, a haven of camaraderie and decent ale, a place where a weary blacksmith could momentarily forget the ceaseless demands of his craft. The good ale, I decided, far outweighed the grumpy farmer and the ludicrous nobleman, at least for now. The following day dawned much like the last, a symphony of groans from my aching body, accompanying the familiar hiss of the bellows. Farmer Giles, bless his stingy soul, had returned, not with thanks for the new plowshares, mind you, but with a litany of complaints. Apparently, one share was slightly bent, another not quite sharp enough, and a third, a masterpiece of craftsmanship, if I may say so myself, was, according to Giles, too pointy. I swear, the man was looking for reasons to complain. He'd scrutinized them under the unforgiving glare of the morning sun, as if expecting to find hidden defects with a magnifying glass. I fought the urge to remind him that these weren't delicate silver spoons, but tools designed to wrestle with stubborn earth, and probably older than his youngest child. His haggling, a ritual as predictable as the sunrise, followed. It was a tedious performance, a negotiation bordering on warfare. Every penny was a battle won or lost, every sigh a calculated tactic in his war against fair prices. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he shuffled away, muttering darkly about the exorbitant cost of good steel, clutching his slightly bent, not quite sharp enough, and excessively pointy plowshares. I watched him go, my weariness amplified by his miserly ways, and then I turned my attention back to the forge, already anticipating the next wave of unreasonable requests. Next came a procession of villagers, each with their own tale of woe and exaggerated expectations. There was old Maeve, whose knitting needles, meticulously crafted from the finest steel, were in her opinion too bendy for her increasingly arthritic fingers. I'd made the needles thinner than a lady's hair. She'd nearly fallen over with joy when she received them. Then there was young Thomas, whose hunting knife, a marvel of balance and sharpness, was deemed too short for tackling the local boar. The boar, apparently, had a height advantage and better eyesight than the young hunter. I swear, I started crafting tools for people, and their complaints turned these into weapons against me. But the pinnacle of my day, the masterpiece of unreasonable requests, arrived in the form of Sir Reginald Strongforth, a knight whose armor gleamed more from polish than battle. He strode into the forge, his spurs clinking on the stone floor, his face radiating an air of self-importance that could curdle milk. He required, he announced, a new sword. Not just any sword, mind you, but a sword worthy of a knight, a champion. Well, you get the picture. His specifications were a symphony of absurdity. It must be lighter than a feather, yet stronger than dragon scales. It had to be sharper than a viper's tooth, yet capable of cleaving through stone. It was to be as ornate as a king's scepter, yet as practical as a farmer's hoe. And the price? He offered the equivalent of a week's worth of my meager wages, not even enough for the materials, which would leave him with a rather blunt stick. I had to suppress a laugh. It would have been rude, but oh, so satisfying. My lord, I began, my voice as smooth as polished steel. Such a magnificent weapon requires exceptional materials, materials that, shall we say, have not yet been mined from the earth. Your initial offer, while generous, simply does not account for the time, skill, and magical intervention required for such a feat of arms. The haggling that followed was a masterpiece of its own kind. Each counteroffer from Sir Reginald was met with a calm, reasoned explanation of why his sum was wholly inadequate, peppered with just enough subtle sarcasm to keep him from losing his temper entirely. Finally, after a grueling hour of negotiation, he agreed to a price that still felt insulting, but at least partially compensated for the sheer audacity of his demands. He left, somewhat chastened, but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes that this extraordinary weapon would soon be in his possession. The relief I felt was immense. The weeks that followed were a blur of similar encounters. Merchants haggling over the price of horseshoes, nobles demanding swords with hilts encrusted with gemstones they couldn't afford, and villagers whose complaints about chipped tools were exceeded only by their stinginess. Each interaction was a comedy of errors, a tiny tragedy played out against the backdrop of the roaring forge. Yet, within the chaos, there was a strange sort of satisfaction, the satisfaction of creating beautiful, functional objects, despite the endless stream of unreasonable clients and their absurd demands. My days were filled with the rhythmic clang of the hammer, the hiss of the bellows, the roar of the furnace, a soundtrack to a life spent wrestling with molten metal and the even more molten tempers of my patrons. My nights were spent nursing my weary body and a slightly less weary spirit. The work was backbreaking, the clients unreasonable, but it was mine, my forge, my life, a crucible of despair and, strangely enough, a source of bizarre satisfaction. It was a life that, despite all of the challenges, was utterly and wonderfully my own. One particular day, a woman, dressed in the simple garb of a farmer's wife, approached me. Her eyes were kind, but her demeanor was filled with a quiet desperation. She needed a new sickle, her old one having finally broken after years of faithful service. She spoke of her family, of the long hours spent working the land. There was no haggling, no exaggerated demands. She merely asked if I could craft a durable, reliable tool that wouldn't let her down. And in that moment, amidst the chaos and absurdity of my daily life, I found a rare sense of purpose. The sickle, when completed, was a simple tool, but it was crafted with care and respect, a far cry from the ornate nonsense of the nobility or the complaining of the farmers. And as she accepted it, her face lighting up with genuine gratitude, I realized that the true satisfaction of my craft wasn't in the wealth it brought or the accolades it garnered. It was in the quiet knowledge that my skills could provide sustenance, assistance, and in this case, a much needed replacement for a tool that had served its time faithfully. It was a reminder that some clients were not inherently unreasonable or stingy, simply those in desperate need of help. The rest, well, the rest were mostly just a colorful part of the tapestry of my medieval life. A tapestry woven, as it was, with threads of fire, steel, and endless streams of complaints that in their peculiar way provided a touch of dark humor to the otherwise grim reality of being a medieval blacksmith. The weeks bled into months, each day a relentless cycle of fire, steel, and the surprisingly resilient spirit of a man who'd somehow managed to avoid serious injury for far too long. Let me assure you, the romantic notion of the blacksmith as a noble craftsman toiling away in quiet contemplation is utter poppycock. It's more akin to a daily wrestling match with molten metal, punctuated by the occasional near-death experience. The most immediate peril, of course, was the ever-present threat of burns, not the minor scorches one might acquire from a carelessly handled teacup, but searing, flesh-melting burns capable of leaving you permanently scarred, or worse. The air itself in the forge was a swirling maelstrom of intense heat, and a single moment of inattention could result in a brand new, rather unpleasant decoration on your arm, face, or, God forbid, your eyes. I've seen men weep like babes, their screams echoing across the village following such encounters. Not even the finest poultice could fully soothe the agony. Then there were the sparks, tiny, malevolent projectiles that would without hesitation seek out the most vulnerable parts of your body. Eyes particularly were frequent targets, and many a blacksmith found themselves spending their evenings nursing a painful and blurry vision. A shield of leather, a good pair of goggles, even a layer of thick hair provided some measure of protection, but only slightly. The protection is still insufficient. I often found myself feeling like a pincushion, each tiny spark leaving its mark, a testament to the daily war waged against the forge. And the fumes, oh, the fumes, a noxious cocktail of coal smoke, metallic dust, and assorted other delights. It was a concoction guaranteed to leave one gasping for breath and coughing up lungfuls of soot. The long-term effects, I suspect, were not pretty, though the medieval doctor would only recommend bleeding or herbs, neither of which is very effective in the long term. Most blacksmiths I knew, myself included, suffered from a chronic cough and a persistent taste of iron in their mouths. This was the price of plying our trade. But the dangers weren't limited to the obvious. The physical strain was immense. Hours spent hammering red-hot metal, the repetitive motions, the awkward postures, it all took its toll. Backaches, shoulder problems, and an assortment of other ailments were as common as the soot on our faces. A bad day could leave me feeling like I'd been flogged mercilessly by a particularly cruel overseer. Then there was the ever present threat of accidents. One day, as I was working on a particularly stubborn piece of metal, the bellows, old and unreliable as it was, decided to stage a dramatic protest. With a deafening roar, it burst, sending a shower of metal shards and a cloud of acrid smoke through the air. I narrowly avoided being impaled by a jagged piece of metal no bigger than my thumb. My heart hammered against my ribs, and that day my work was disrupted with a large fright. The repair was a tedious affair, made all the more frustrating by the incessant drip, drip, drip of water from the leaky roof. The roof, like much of my forge, was in a state of disrepair, a testament to my landlord's remarkable lack of concern for my well-being and the structural integrity of his property. This wasn't solely a threat from the elements. The leaky roof also served as a welcome highway for rats and other unwanted guests. These nocturnal visitors, as you can probably imagine, were not conducive to the serenity of a blacksmith's existence. I'd often found myself swatting at scurrying rodents as I worked, adding a novel level of complexity to my tasks. And the irony was, the more elaborate the piece, the greater the danger. Crafting a suit of armor, for example, was a feat of considerable skill, requiring hours of painstaking work with red-hot metal. One misplaced hammer blow, one moment of carelessness, and you could easily inflict a severe injury upon yourself and ruin what was usually a high-paying commission. Yet, there was a strange sense of satisfaction when the piece was finished, especially the beautiful armor suits that had zero damages or injuries during the crafting process. The sense of satisfaction was high. It's also important to remember that we blacksmiths of the medieval period worked without the safety regulations we take for granted today. No safety glasses, no protective gloves, no OSHA inspectors to ensure that my bellows didn't explode and send me sprawling. Workplace injuries were commonplace, often debilitating, and frequently fatal. A blacksmith's life expectancy was, to put it mildly, less than stellar. Yet, we plied our trade. We were survivors, hardened by years of toil and close calls, bearing scars, both physical and emotional, as badges of honor. In the absence of any safety net, the blacksmith relied on experience, skill, and a healthy dose of luck. We learned from our mistakes, often painful ones, and passed down our hard-won wisdom to apprentices. But the reality was, the work was dangerous, brutal, and often unforgiving. And yet, I wouldn't trade it for all the gold in the king's treasury. The forge was my domain, my life's work, a crucible where I wrestled not only with metal, but also with the elements, the vermin, and the ever-present possibility of a nasty accident. It was a harsh existence, but it was mine, and I suppose, in a strangely twisted way, it was rather satisfying. My own experience is hardly unique. The smithy's tale is a familiar one across the ages, from the ancient forges of Rome to the bustling workshops of the Industrial Revolution. The work has always been demanding, and the dangers ever present. Perhaps this is why the myth of the blacksmith, the heroic craftsman, persists, a romanticized image that masks the reality of a life lived on the edge, a life filled with the satisfying clang of the hammer, yes, but also with the ever-present threat of burns, broken bones and a premature demise. It's a life that demands respect, not just for the skill involved, but also for the sheer grit and endurance needed to survive. And maybe, just maybe, a dash of dark humor to keep the despair at bay. A touch of humor, like a well-forged piece of steel, can make the most unforgiving of lives slightly easier to bear. My hands, calloused and scarred from years of wrestling with molten metal, are as much a testament to my trade as any finished piece. They remember the weight of the hammer, the sting of the spark, the searing heat of the forge, and they recall, with painful clarity, the tools that shaped them, and in turn, shaped the very world around me. To understand the life of a medieval blacksmith, one must first understand the tools of his trade. The first, and arguably most important, was the hammer. Not some dainty thing for tapping out sheet metal, but a hefty beast, forged from the finest steel, its head carefully balanced to deliver a powerful, precise blow. Mine was a family heirloom, passed down through generations of smiths, its worn handle a testament to the countless tons of metal it had shaped. The weight felt comforting and familiar in my grip, an extension of myself. Its heft was crucial. The hammerhead's balance was paramount, affecting the rhythm of the swing, impacting the flow of work. A poorly balanced hammer meant a less precise blow, a less consistent finish, and potentially a ruined piece. Finding the right balance was an art form in itself, often involving tedious adjustments and numerous test strikes. It was a matter of trial, error, and a considerable amount of patience. The modern blacksmith might laugh at this now refined skill. They have tools for measurement, calibration, and weight distribution. They have digital tools to simulate the process. However, it all started with years of experience and adjustments until the right balance was reached. Next came the anvil, a solid block of iron or steel, the unwavering foundation upon which all our creations took shape. Ours was a hefty beast, its surface scarred and pitted from years of relentless pounding, each dent a story in itself, a chronicle of hammers and metal. It was anchored firmly to the ground, a fixture of the forge as essential as the hearth itself. Its size mattered. A small anvil severely limits the size of work one can handle. The size and shape of the anvil determined not only its structural stability, but also the possibilities of the work itself and the sound itself. A large, robust anvil would ring clear, while a smaller, less substantial one would make a dull thud that reflected the imperfections of the work. The size of the anvil was a status symbol as well. A bigger anvil often meant a more established blacksmith. In comparison, modern anvils are often made from lighter metals or alloys to ease transportation, making them more suitable for the convenience of modern shops. The tongs, too, were indispensable. These weren't your delicate salad tongs, but rather robust, heavy-duty instruments used to manipulate red-hot metal with precision. They needed to grip fiercely, but also allow for the adjustment and manipulation of the object. Several sets were needed for various shapes and sizes of metal. One would be used for manipulating longer or thicker pieces, another for smaller or more delicate metalwork. The construction itself, a testament to ingenious design, was something to behold. Modern blacksmiths have many tongs at their disposal, each specialized for a unique task. This is not only easier, but also safer for handling hot metal. Then there were the chisels, punches, and other striking tools, each designed for a specific purpose. Their craftsmanship was as crucial as their design, for a poorly made tool could easily break under the strain, sending a shard of steel flying through the air, usually towards the blacksmith. Each chisel, for example, had a unique profile and hardness, specifically to suit the type of steel it was meant to work on. The quality of each tool was directly proportional to the quality of the finished work, not to mention the blacksmith's physical well-being. The bellows, a vital component of the forge, was responsible for feeding the fire with a steady stream of air, keeping the coals burning fiercely. Ours was a crude contraption, a simple wooden box with leather flaps and a long handle, requiring a constant pumping to maintain the desired intensity. It was a physically demanding task, a continuous and repetitive action that required strength, stamina, and a certain amount of coordination. Modern-day blacksmiths have electric blowers, which are quieter and far more efficient than the old bellows, making the creation of fire a less physically draining task. It was also susceptible to breakdowns, and repair was almost always a tedious affair. One wrong move could result in a severe burn. The forge itself was a simple structure, a hole in the ground or a brick enclosure, its humble appearance belying the intense heat and energy it contained. Modern forges, however, offer a much safer and more controlled environment. Electric, gas-powered, or coal-fired, these modern iterations offer many safety features, adjustable heat levels, and even automated controls. The overall quality and safety are remarkably improved, increasing efficiency and minimizing risk. The level of control also allows for a wider range of experimentation. Compared to the simple, robust tools of the medieval smith, today's blacksmith has access to a vast array of sophisticated equipment. Power hammers, for example, can deliver blows with far greater force and speed than any human arm could ever manage. Welding torches allow for the seamless joining of metals, eliminating the need for painstaking riveting and forging. High-powered grinders, drills, and cutting tools significantly reduce the time and effort required to shape metal and increase the overall quality and consistency of the work. Modern tools for measuring angles, pressures, and materials also ensure higher quality work. However, this technological advancement brings with it a certain loss. The tools of my trade, though simple, possessed a tactile intimacy that modern equipment lacks. The feel of the hammer in my hand, the precise control afforded by the tongs, the responsiveness of the anvil. These were all elements of an intimate dance between man and metal. Modern tools are incredibly convenient, yes, but they lack the same connection between hand and process. You have less of a physical bond with your creation. You have less opportunity for learning through direct experience, trial, and error. There's less of that intimate interplay between the mind, the muscle, and the material. Modern tools, for all their efficiency, also remove a layer of the artistry, reducing the process into a somewhat impersonal and mechanical endeavor. And while the enduring principles of metalworking remain the same, heat, shape, cool, the experience, the physical and mental toll is undeniably different. The evolution of blacksmithing tools mirrors the broader changes in our world, a constant interplay between technological advancement and the enduring value of skill, craftsmanship, and that undeniable bond between man and the materials he transforms. The work, however, remained as challenging and occasionally perilous. The satisfaction of working with fire and steel was as potent as ever. This is the legacy of every blacksmith, from the medieval forge to the modern workshop, and each generation's impact upon the profession is ever present in the metal itself. The story is written not only in the tools, but in the metal itself, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, forged in fire and shaped by time. A story hammered out, blow by painstaking blow, on the anvil of history. But even the most hardened heart, even one perpetually coated in soot and the scent of burnt metal, can find moments of unexpected joy. It wasn't the wealth that fueled my spirit, though a few extra shillings were always welcome. It wasn't the praise, which was as rare as a perfectly straight piece of iron. No, my satisfaction stemmed from the creation itself, the transformation of raw, unyielding iron ore into something both beautiful and functional. A sword that could cleave through armor, a sturdy hinge that would outlast its owner, or a horseshoe that could carry a knight across a battlefield. That was my reward. That, and a good ale, the rhythmic clang of my hammer against the anvil, the satisfying hiss of metal plunging into the quenching trough, the glow of the forge painting my face in an orange hue. These were not just the sounds and sights of my labor, they were the soundtrack of my life. And in those moments, when the rhythm of the work took over, when my mind was lost in the dance of hammer and steel, there was a strange sort of peace, a meditative state perhaps, forged in the heat of the fire. It was in these moments, amidst the sweat and the sparks, that I felt most alive. The crude, unforgiving metal yielded to my will. It felt akin to sculpting from pure, stubborn energy. Each strike of the hammer was a whisper, a command, a prayer. Of course, this wasn't always the case. Sometimes the metal fought back. Sometimes it cracked, warped, or otherwise defied my attempts to shape it. These were the days when the ale tasted particularly good. There were days when the work felt relentless, the heat unbearable, and the customers, well, the customers were always a trial. Their complaints were varied and endless. The sword wasn't sharp enough, the plowshare too thin, the nails bent. It was a symphony of dissatisfaction, a chorus of discontent played on the discordant strings of unrealistic expectations. One particularly memorable fellow had the audacity to claim my finest broadsword was too heavy to wield. I wanted to ask him if he'd prefer a butter knife, but then there were the rare moments of camaraderie, of connection with other craftsmen. Medieval social gatherings weren't exactly brimming with social butterflies, particularly those coated in coal dust and sporting a few burns. But every now and then, a fellow blacksmith, carpenter, or wheelwright would wander past my forge, drawn by the glow of the fire. These were the silent exchanges, shared glances acknowledging the shared hardship and the quiet pride in our respective crafts. A nod, a shared grunt of affirmation over a particularly stubborn piece of iron, a brief exchange of tips and techniques. These small interactions were invaluable. They were the tiny embers that kept the flame of morale flickering in the otherwise dark and smoky forge. One such encounter involved a journeyman carpenter named Elias. He'd been struggling to shape the intricate curves of an ornate church door, and the oak was being particularly uncooperative. After a brief but informative exchange, we had a few tankards of ale and a prolonged debate on the merits of different types of wood. There was a mutual understanding of the challenges, the pride in our respective crafts. It reminded me of the shared experience, the silent language of toil understood by all artisans, a community forged not only in metal, but in the shared experience of creation. These quiet moments of exchange, however brief, served as a much needed counterpoint to the often solitary nature of my work. They punctuated the day with a shared understanding, a connection that transcended the differences in our trades. It was a reminder that despite the isolation of the forge, I was not alone in my struggles. We were all toiling under a similar burden, striving to shape raw materials into something beautiful, something lasting. Sometimes it felt as if I were working within an isolated bubble, within my own self contained world. The occasional interaction with fellow craftsmen was a welcome change of pace, a reminder that I wasn't totally removed from society. And then there was the ale. Ah, the ale. The ale from the Golden Barrel Tavern was an elixir, a balm for weary muscles, and a soother for a frazzled soul. It was a dark, rich brew, thick and robust, with a slightly bitter taste that complemented the sweetness of the malt. It was a reward, a celebration of survival after a long day of wrestling with unruly metal. After the initial shock and the burns from the iron, one could truly appreciate the smooth comfort of a cool drink, especially if paired with a proper meal. The Golden Barrel itself was a haven, a refuge from the harsh realities of the world outside. The air hung thick with the smells of roasted meat, wood smoke, and ale, a comforting blend that always seemed to soothe my weary soul. The tavern was a place to forget, for a little while at least, the aching muscles, the stinging sparks, and the unreasonable demands of clients. The laughter and chatter of patrons served as a much needed distraction, and the occasional song or story a welcome interlude to the relentless rhythm of the forge. The banner could be amusing, coarse, and sometimes even slightly offensive, but it was real, a refreshing change of pace from the solitary world of the smithy. The Golden Barrel's ale wasn't just a drink, it was a symbol of respite, a testament to the simple pleasures that could be found even in the harshest of lives. It was a tiny spark of joy in the darkness, a well-earned reward for a day spent in the crucible of despair. Each gulp was a toast to perseverance, to the enduring human spirit, and to the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, no matter how ungratefully received it might have been. It wasn't just the taste, it was the company, the camaraderie, the temporary escape from the ceaseless demands of the forge. In the dimly lit corners of the tavern, I was just Thomas, not the blacksmith, a man weary from his labors, looking to find a little joy amidst the soot and the smoke. And there, in the midst of the clinking tankards and the boisterous laughter, I found a different sort of rhythm, a counterpoint to the relentless beat of my hammer. It was a different kind of creation, a different kind of forging. This was the forging of community, the forging of friendship, the forging of solace. It was a different kind of heat, a warmth that wasn't born in the fire of my forge, but in the shared laughter and camaraderie of those who understood the price of honest work. It was a fleeting respite, a moment of peace amidst the relentless battle between man and metal, but it was a peace I cherished, a small victory in a life that demanded much and often gave so little in return. It was enough to keep me hammering away, day after day, until the next well-deserved pint, the next quiet moment, the next unexpectedly bright spot in the otherwise grim and soot-filled reality of a medieval blacksmith's life. Chapter 2. The Hammer's Lament. The air in the forge hung thick and heavy, a miasma of coal dust and sweat. The fire, a malevolent orange beast, roared in its belly, casting flickering shadows that danced across the rough-hewn stones. This was my domain, my kingdom of clang and heat, a place where iron yielded to the relentless rhythm of hammer and anvil. Creating a sword wasn't merely a matter of hammering hot metal. It was a dance, a conversation between man and material, a battle of wills played out under the watchful gaze of the fire god. It began with the ore, a lump of dull, unyielding rock, seemingly devoid of the potential it held within. First, the heating, a gradual process, a slow coaxing of the iron from its stony slumber. The bellows roared, a mechanical lung pumping life into the flames, their heat growing hotter and hotter until the ore glowed a cherry red, then a blinding white. This was the moment of transformation, the moment where potential became reality. Then came the shaping, the forging. The glowing mass was pulled from the fire, its weight surprisingly immense, even for a man as accustomed to heavy lifting as myself. The first blows of the hammer were hesitant, exploratory, feeling for the grain of the iron, searching for its weaknesses and strengths. Each strike had to be precise, calculated, mindful of the heat, the malleability of the metal, and the ever-present risk of cracking the workpiece. My arms ached, my back throbbed, and the sweat streamed from my brow, but the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil, a constant companion, kept me moving, kept me focused. The dull, misshapen mass began to take form, gradually yielding to my will, to the relentless pressure of my hammer. Hours passed in this dance of fire and steel, the heat unwavering, the work unending. The sword's shape slowly emerged, from a shapeless blob to a rough approximation of the blade I envisioned. The hammer's lament, the rhythmic percussion, was my constant companion, punctuated only by the hiss of the water as I quenched the metal, hardening the steel in the icy depths of the trough. This was a crucial step, for a sword without a properly hardened blade was nothing but a costly, decorative stick. The transition from malleable to resilient required a delicate balance, one that had to be learned through repeated failure and stubborn perseverance. Tempering followed, a carefully controlled reheating and cooling process designed to regulate the steel's hardness and flexibility. Too hard, and it would shatter. Too soft, and it would bend. This was the art of the forge, the alchemy of steel, the dance of heat and cold, a process as delicate as it was demanding. Again, the bellows roared, the fire burned, and the hammer sang its song. But a sword is more than just a piece of hardened steel. It is a thing of beauty, a symbol of power and artistry. It is a reflection of the blacksmith's skill and imagination, his understanding of metal and its potential. Once the basic blade was forged, the painstaking work of shaping and refining began. The edges had to be precisely sharpened, the surface polished to a mirror sheen, and finally, the details, the hilt, the pommel, the guard, were added. Each step was a test of patience, a demand for precision. It wasn't just metal I was working with. It was a story, a legend in the making. I've crafted many swords in my time, each one unique, each one carrying its own story. There was the dragon's tooth, a broadsword for a knight whose coat of arms bore a snarling dragon. Its blade curved slightly upward, almost mimicking the dragon's aggressive posture. And then there was the whisperwind, a rapier with a blade so slender and sharp it felt almost ethereal, its very design suggesting speed and grace. These weren't mere weapons. They were extensions of their owner's character and abilities, a manifestation of their hopes and ambitions. And as I worked, I couldn't help but think of the legends, the myths, the stories woven around famous swords throughout history. Excalibur, pulled from the stone, its legend as sharp as its blade. Graham, Sigurd's sword, capable of slaying dragons. These were more than just weapons. They were symbols of power, of destiny, objects of myth and legend, imbued with a power far surpassing their physical properties. They were tales whispered in taverns, sung by bards, and recited around crackling campfires, tales that fueled the imaginations of generations and indirectly fueled my own passion for the craft. My creations may not achieve the same level of legendary status, but they were a testament to my own dedication, my own contribution to the ever-evolving saga of man and metal. The final stage, the polishing, was a meditative ritual, a process of smoothing the surface, removing the imperfections, revealing the true beauty of the metal beneath. It was a process that demanded patience, for each scratch had to be painstakingly removed, each imperfection addressed. I would often find myself lost in this repetitive task, my mind wandering, reflecting on the long hours spent shaping this weapon, this extension of a warrior's will. As I held the finished sword, a feeling of satisfaction washed over me, a sense of quiet pride. It was not merely a weapon, it was a piece of art, a testament to the skill and passion that went into its creation. It was a tangible symbol of the transformation, the alchemy of transforming raw material into something powerful, something beautiful, something capable of changing the course of a battle, or perhaps even a life. It was a feeling so profound that it transcended the simple act of crafting. The weight of the sword felt satisfying in my hand, the perfect balance testament to the hours of work that went into its creation. The sharp edge gleamed, ready to face whatever threat might come its way. The process was not just one of metalworking. It was a melding of artistic precision with physical strength, a combination of technical skill and aesthetic appreciation. The metal, once a dull and unyielding ore, had been reborn, forged into a weapon of considerable power, a tool that could serve to defend or to destroy. The transformation was as complete as it was spectacular. The raw material reshaped to something that transcended its original form, and as I placed the sword in its scabbard, a peculiar sense of detachment washed over me. It was a bittersweet farewell. A craftsman poured his heart and soul into his work, only to let it go, to entrust it to another, to an unknown destiny. But then again, that was the nature of the forge, wasn't it? To create, to transform, to release, to shape steel, and in doing so, to shape destiny, if only in a small way. The fire continued to burn, beckoning me back, preparing me for my next project, my next challenge, my next conversation with the unyielding heart of iron. The hammer waited patiently for the next lament, the next song of creation, the next story to be forged in fire. The rhythmic clang of the hammer, my constant companion, faded into the quiet of the evening. The fire in the forge, once a raging inferno, dwindled to embers, leaving behind a ghostly glow on the tools scattered across my workbench. My body ached, a symphony of twinges and stiffness, a testament to the day's labor. But the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the gnawing anxiety that settled in my gut as I tallied the day's earnings. 3 shillings, barely enough to cover the cost of the coal. The economics of iron, it turned out, were far more brutal than the iron itself. Forget the romanticized image of the independent craftsman, the master of his own destiny. The reality was far less glamorous. It was a relentless struggle for survival, a constant dance on the razor's edge between solvency and ruin. The price of iron ore fluctuated wildly, depending on the season, the weather, and the whims of the merchants who controlled the supply. Sometimes it seemed the ore was more precious than the finished product. One day, the price would be low, enticing me to buy in bulk and fill my storeroom, only to find the market flooded with the next shipment, driving the price down even further. My carefully laid plans would go up in smoke, quite literally, as the unsold stock became a heavy, expensive burden. On other days, it soared astronomically, making even the most basic tools unaffordable to the common people. Those were the days I cursed the merchants who held the reins of the market. I dreamed of owning my own mine, but such ambitions were as fantastical as the mythical dragons that occasionally decorated my more elaborate commissions. The competition was as fierce as the fire itself. Every village boasted at least one blacksmith, some more skilled than others, some more cunning in their dealings. The younger lads, eager to prove themselves, often undercut my prices, offering swords and tools at prices that barely covered the cost of materials, leaving me with little room for profit. Old Giles, a grumpy veteran who had seen more winners than I had hammered nails, often resorted to unscrupulous tactics, spreading rumors about the quality of my work and trying to steal my clients. This constant pressure weighed on me. I wondered if the legends of master blacksmiths were just that, legends, or if they too struggled with the daily grind and found this existence as challenging as it was fulfilling. Then there were the customers, a motley crew of farmers, soldiers, and merchants, each with their own peculiar demands and unreasonable expectations. They would haggle relentlessly over prices, complaining about the minutest imperfection, even on a weapon they couldn't afford to begin with. A chipped pommel, a slightly uneven edge. It was all fuel for their endless arguments and endless haggling. I'd spend more time arguing about prices than actually working, more time negotiating than shaping steel. Many times, I caught myself thinking that a blacksmith's life was one long, complicated negotiation. The only thing more frustrating than the constant complaints was the occasional request for work that exceeded my skills, pushing my ability to the limit. One particularly memorable occasion involved a wealthy merchant who commissioned a suit of armor so elaborate and intricate that it took me months to complete. He inspected the finished product with the critical eye of a hawk, complaining about the shading on the breastplate and the angle of a certain rivet. In the end, he paid less than half of what the work was worth, leaving me to stare at the exquisite armor with a bitter mix of satisfaction and resentment. The precarious nature of self-employment in the medieval world was a constant source of anxiety. There was no safety net, no guaranteed income, no sick leave. One bad harvest, a plague, or a sudden drop in demand, and I could find myself staring at starvation. Every penny earned had to be carefully managed, every expense carefully scrutinized. The cost of coal, the price of iron, the upkeep of my tools. It was a constant juggling act, a balancing act on a tightrope stretched over a chasm of debt. The modern notion of a regular paycheck, health insurance, and unemployment benefits seemed as fantastical as a self-sharpening sword. I often contrasted my situation with that of modern blacksmiths, friends who worked in far more comfortable circumstances. They were part of a broader system where the demands and regulations were in place, creating a system where risks were shared and more manageable. These were people who could afford proper apprenticeships and equipment without constantly worrying about whether or not they could afford to put food on the table. They often looked upon my trade with a mixture of romantic idealism and bewilderment. They envied my skill, the tangible results of my labor. They couldn't comprehend the crushing weight of financial uncertainty that always hung over my head like the smoke from the forge. The irony, of course, was that they often romanticized the blacksmith's life, ignoring the very real economic struggles that defined my daily existence. One of my modern friends, a charismatic fellow with a booming laugh, runs a thriving metalworking business. He showed me pictures of his modern forge, a gleaming space filled with advanced machinery, efficient ventilation, and even comfortable seating. He described his apprenticeships, his financial planning, his health insurance. It was a world away from my own, a world where the focus was on safety, efficiency, and long-term sustainability. His business, though a far cry from the primitive forges of the Middle Ages, shared a similar core, one centered around the same fundamental principles, albeit on a far greater and more regulated scale. His modern version of the craft shared little in common with mine, aside from the shared skill and passion for metalwork. Evenings often found me staring at the ledger, a thin book filled with meticulous records of my income and expenses, a testament to my relentless efforts to balance the books. The ledger was a stark reminder of the precariousness of my existence, a constant reminder that one missed payment, one sudden illness, one unforeseen event could send me spiraling into poverty. It was a life far removed from the heroic tales of valiant knights and their legendary swords, a life lived in the shadows of economic insecurity. Yet, even as I grappled with the endless struggle for survival, I found a perverse kind of satisfaction in my work. The act of creation, the transformation of raw material into something beautiful and functional, provided a counterpoint to the daily grind, a respite from the gnawing anxieties of the marketplace. The rhythmic clang of the hammer, the heat of the forge, the smell of coal and sweat. These were the things that anchored me, the things that gave my life meaning. And in the quiet moments, when the fire died down and the shadows lengthened, I could almost forget the relentless pressure, the constant struggle, and imagine myself as a hero of the age. But the next morning, the ledger was always there, waiting, a harsh reminder of the reality of a medieval blacksmith's life. The hammer's lament wasn't just a rhythmic sound, it was a song of survival, a song of struggle, a song of the economic realities of a medieval life, a life both challenging and rewarding, a life filled with the stark contrast of artistic satisfaction and economic precarity, a life, in short, that was anything but boring. The flickering firelight cast long, dancing shadows across the forge, painting grotesque shapes on the walls that seemed to mock my weary frame. Evenings were for reflection, a time when the clang of hammer on steel yielded to the quiet whisper of anxieties. But tonight, my thoughts weren't just on dwindling shillings or the latest complaint from a disgruntled customer. Tonight, they were on the strange alchemy of my trade, the blend of hard-won knowledge and superstitious nonsense that defined medieval metallurgy. My grandfather, a man whose beard held more iron filings than wisdom, swore by the lucky strike. He believed that the first blow of the hammer each morning determined the success of the entire day's work. A poor first strike, he claimed, foretold a day of broken tools and ruined metal. He'd perform a small ritual before each day's work, muttering incantations and offering a pinch of salt to the forge's spirit. Whether it was the placebo effect or simply the careful preparation such rituals ensured, I couldn't say for sure. But his hammers, unlike mine, rarely broke. The belief in the magical properties of certain ores was widespread. Some ores, unearthed under a specific constellation, were considered blessed, promising stronger, more resilient metal. Others, found near ancient burial grounds or in places touched by lightning, were deemed cursed, prone to shattering or producing brittle iron that could shatter at the slightest stress. I'd heard tales of smiths who refused to work with certain ores, fearing the wrath of the spirits dwelling within. Naturally, such ores would often be cheaper, leaving a savvy blacksmith like myself to weigh the risks, or rather, to profit from other smiths' superstitious fears. There were practical reasons behind some of these beliefs, reasons masked by the cloak of superstition. Certain ores, for instance, might have indeed possessed higher carbon content or different trace elements which impacted their ability to yield high-quality steel. The cursed ores may simply have been less consistent in their composition, resulting in inferior finished products. It was only in my own time, thanks to my modern blacksmithing friends, that I could begin to reconcile these ancient fears and beliefs with scientific principles. The process of smelting itself was shrouded in mystery. The timing of the fire, the precise temperature, the addition of flux, all these elements were considered crucial. Experienced smiths guarded their techniques closely, treating them as secret knowledge passed down through generations. Recipes for different types of steel were like prized family heirlooms, whispered in hushed tones and protected with fierce loyalty. A fiercely guarded secret often worth more than the ore itself. My grandfather would spend hours meticulously controlling the heat of the forge, muttering prayers to Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, while ensuring the correct ratio of charcoal to ore. I sometimes wondered if his reverence for the Roman god of the forge was connected to the superior quality of his work. The lore surrounding the forging process itself was equally fascinating. The shape of the hammer, the rhythm of the blows, the precise angle of the strike, every detail was considered significant, not only for the quality of the finished product, but for the smith's personal safety. It was considered ill-fated to start a new project on a Friday or to work under a waning moon. These weren't just idle superstitions. They reflected a practical understanding of the dangers of the work and a respect for the unpredictable nature of molten metal. The belief in a connection between the natural world and the forging process served to promote a sense of safety and precaution in an inherently dangerous profession. The smith's own state of mind also played a role in the success of his work. Anger, it was said, could transfer into the metal, creating brittle weapons that would break in battle. Fear, on the other hand, could lead to mistakes, potentially resulting in injury. This isn't just mystical nonsense. Stress and inattention to detail would increase the chance of accidents in the dangerous working conditions of a medieval forge. Despite the prevalence of these superstitions, however, the practical knowledge of metallurgy was also advancing. The Romans, in their empire's heyday, developed sophisticated techniques for producing high-quality iron and steel, some of which found its way to my region. Gradually, through trial and error, smiths like myself were developing their own understanding of the chemical and physical properties of metals, combining that knowledge with passed down traditions, albeit still tinged with the ancient superstitious beliefs. We understood, for example, that certain additives improved the strength and durability of steel, although we often expressed this understanding in terms of magical enhancements. For instance, the addition of certain herbs and plants to the furnace was believed to add strength and charm to the weapons, providing magical protection to the wielder. These were not simply meaningless superstitions. Some plants might have provided trace minerals that improved the metal's properties, while others, burnt in the fire, may have altered its temperature and chemical composition. It's a blend of practical knowledge, masked by superstition, and often far more effective than the average historian would care to acknowledge. The evolution of understanding in medieval metallurgy was a slow, uneven process, a fascinating interplay between traditional belief and practical experimentation. While superstitions played a significant role in shaping the work, they coexisted with the ever-growing empirical knowledge of the trade. The sheer power of practical experience, handed down from generation to generation, continually refined and improved techniques. The contrast between superstition and science within the craft wasn't a simple dichotomy. It was a complex dance, a continuous interplay, a practical and superstitious partnership. Each smith, each generation, added their own nuance, their own touch to this peculiar combination. Even I, with my relatively more scientific-minded approach, found myself sometimes falling victim to the age-old superstitions. Sometimes, when the coal refused to ignite or the iron stubbornly resisted shaping, I'd whisper a prayer to Vulcan, my grandfather's tutelary deity, a small concession to the ages and to the capricious nature of my trade. And sometimes it worked, or at least I like to think it did, because in the end, a successful piece of metalwork, regardless of the magic involved, put food on the table, a much more effective charm than any herbs or incantations. The ledger, that ever present reminder of economic reality, remains my most effective form of magic. The rhythmic clang of my hammer, a constant companion for years, fell silent as I surveyed my workshop. The flickering firelight, once a source of both warmth and anxiety, was now replaced by the sterile hum of electric lighting. My thoughts drifted back to the sweat-drenched days spent in the stifling heat of my medieval forge, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled comfort of my modern workspace. The transition, while undeniably easier on my aging body, felt strangely disorienting, like stepping through a portal that had ripped a hole between centuries. The tools themselves spoke volumes about the evolution of the craft. In the medieval forge, my primary tools were my hammer, tongs, and a selection of hand-forged punches and chisels. Each tool was a testament to meticulous craftsmanship, often repaired and reforged countless times. The tools were extensions of myself, their heft and balance familiar to the bone. The slightest imperfection could mean a ruined piece of work, a twisted ankle, or a searing burn. Every swing of the hammer was a gamble, a delicate dance between strength and precision, tempered with a deep, intuitive understanding of the material. Compared to the power tools of the modern smithy, my medieval instruments were crude, yet their very crudeness demanded a higher level of skill and finesse. The bellows, a cumbersome contraption of wood and leather, demanded constant attention, its rhythmic wheeze a soundtrack to my daily toil. The temperature of the forge was gauged by eye, by the color of the coals and the feel of the air, a skill born of years of experience and often a healthy dose of intuition. The control was less precise, the process more demanding, yet somehow more rewarding. The final product felt truly earned, its imperfections testament to the limitations of technology and the skill involved in overcoming them. Each piece held within its metal a tangible piece of my labor, my sweat, my very being. Now, I stand before a gas-fired forge, its precise temperature controlled by a digital readout. A power hammer, a beast of steel and electricity, sits silent beside me, capable of shaping metal with a force beyond anything I could achieve with my own two hands. There are electric grinders, pneumatic chisels, and a seemingly endless array of specialized tools, tools that were beyond imagining in the medieval world. The precision is astonishing, the speed breathtaking, yet a strange hollowness has settled over my work, a feeling of detachment, as if I'm no longer intimately involved with the shaping of the metal, but merely operating a machine. The safety standards also represent a quantum leap. In my medieval forge, injuries were as commonplace as blistered hands. Burns were a daily occurrence. Cuts and bruises were unavoidable, and the constant inhalation of coal dust resulted in a chronic cough. The risk of eye injury from flying sparks or metal fragments was ever present. We had little protection, only our skill and luck to shield us from disaster. In my modern forge, I have protective eyewear, a face shield, heavy leather aprons, and gloves. The workshop is well ventilated, reducing the risk of harmful inhalation. The contrast is striking. The medieval smith worked in a constant state of physical and mental tension, his every movement a potential source of pain or injury. The modern smith, by contrast, works in a relative state of comfort and safety. It's a trade off. The increased safety and efficiency have lessened the physical toll, yet there's a loss of that intimate connection with the material, that shared struggle with the unyielding metal. Perhaps the most profound difference lies in the sense of community. In my medieval village, the forge was the heart of the community, a place of shared experience, of stories and laughter, of camaraderie forged in the fires of the furnace. We shared knowledge, techniques, and even superstitious beliefs, creating a strong bond between us smiths. The modern blacksmithing community is certainly different, spread across vast distances, connected by the internet and online forums. While this allows for a wider exchange of ideas and techniques, it lacks the immediacy and intimacy of the medieval setting. It's a more dispersed fellowship, more individualistic, and far less grounded in the shared experience of the shared workplace. Another critical contrast is found in the client interaction. Medieval clients were not noted for their patience or their understanding. They often haggled over prices, nitpicked at the smallest imperfections, and had absurdly specific demands. The frustration was relentless, a constant battle against unreasonable expectations and a never-ending struggle to meet deadlines with inadequate tools. Modern clients are far more reasonable, mostly. They understand the time, effort, and skill involved in handcrafting metalwork. The level of precision and detail I can offer with modern equipment makes a significant difference. The feedback loop is quicker, and I can adapt my approach based on the customer's needs, building a stronger collaborative relationship. There is a different sense of professionalism, almost clinical, compared to the familial and immediate relationships of the medieval village. The nature of the work itself has also evolved. In medieval times, the blacksmith was primarily concerned with producing functional tools and weapons, everything from plowshares to swords. Modern blacksmithing encompasses a much wider range of artistic and decorative projects, reflecting a shift in demand and a greater appreciation for the aesthetic potential of metalwork. While I can still craft a functional tool or a sword that would not look out of place in any medieval battlefield, I can also produce decorative pieces, metal sculptures, and even furniture. This diversification allows for greater creative expression and a more diverse customer base. Nevertheless, there's a fundamental truth that remains unchanged across centuries. The inherent challenge of working with metal, the enduring satisfaction of creating something durable and functional from raw materials, remains a profound satisfaction. The satisfaction of witnessing the metal obey the rhythm of hammer and fire, of shaping it into something useful and beautiful. It's a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance, an art form that has endured through the ages, adapting and evolving to meet the ever-changing needs of humanity. In both eras, the fundamental thrill of forging lies in the creative process, in pushing the limits of material and skill to create something extraordinary. This elemental connection persists despite the vast gulf between the medieval forge and the modern workshop, a testament to the enduring power of the craft itself. The modern forge, with all its advanced tools and safety measures, offers a degree of efficiency and precision that was unimaginable in medieval times. But the medieval forge, with its inherent dangers and reliance on manual skill, fostered a level of intimacy and connection with the craft that is arguably lost in the modern age. It's not a simple matter of better or worse, but rather of distinct experiences, each with its own unique challenges and rewards. The legacy of the medieval smith persists within me, a deep-seated understanding of the material, honed through years of sweat and toil, a connection to the rhythmic pulse of the hammer and fire, a bond that transcends time itself. Even now, surrounded by the hum of electric tools, I can still hear the whisper of the ancient forge, a poignant reminder of the enduring spirit of the craft. The clang of the hammer, once the soundtrack of my life, now echoes only in memory. The rhythmic beat, the satisfying thud of metal meeting metal, the hiss of quenching steel, these are sounds that now only surface in dreams, replaced by the hum of electric motors and the whir of grinding wheels. Passing on the craft, I realized, wasn't just about transferring skills. It was about passing on a legacy, a history etched into the very grain of the steel. It was a responsibility heavier than any anvil I'd ever lifted. My own apprenticeship began when I was barely a man, skinny as a rail, and more interested in chasing girls than chasing glowing embers. Old Elias, my master, was a man carved from the same iron he worked, gruff, impatient, yet possessing a wealth of knowledge that took years to fully appreciate. He didn't teach me with flowery lectures or gentle encouragement. His method was more direct. A misplaced hammer blow resulted in a sharp word. A missed detail in a finished piece brought a withering glare. His lessons were delivered in the language of sweat, blisters, and the occasional well-placed kick to the backside when my attention wavered. Yet, within his harsh exterior was a deep well of skill and a fierce loyalty to the craft. He saw in me not just an apprentice, but a potential heir to his legacy, someone to carry the torch when his own hands grew too weak to wield the hammer. He taught me not just the technicalities of the trade, the proper heat for forging, the angle of the strike, the feel of the metal under the hammer, but also the intangible aspects, the patience, the perseverance, the almost mystical connection one developed with the material. It wasn't just about learning to shape the metal. It was about understanding it, about anticipating in its behavior, its stubborn resistance, its readiness to yield. It was a dialogue conducted in sparks, hammer blows, and the glow of the forge. Each piece of work was a lesson, a test, a step closer to mastery. And mastery, Elias constantly reminded me, was a lifelong pursuit, a journey without end. The hours were endless. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. My hands, initially soft and uncalloused, became tough, scarred, and permanently stained with the colors of the forge. The smell of coal smoke and hot metal permeated my clothes, my hair, my very being. It was a life of hard work, demanding physical endurance and unwavering dedication. There was little room for error. A single mistake could ruin hours, even days, of painstaking work. But the rewards were beyond measure. The satisfaction of transforming raw materials into finished products, the creation of something beautiful and useful from fire and steel, was a unique experience, an almost addictive feeling. It was a connection to generations of smiths who had walked the same path before me, their legacy living on in the work of their hands. And yet, that legacy is fragile. The industrial age, with its mass production and reliance on machinery, threatened to extinguish the flame of traditional crafts. The apprenticeship system, once the cornerstone of skill transmission, is weakening, replaced by standardized training programs that often lack the depth of experience passed down through generations. The intimate knowledge of materials, the subtle nuances of the craft, the almost intuitive understanding of the metal's behavior. These are aspects that cannot easily be learned from textbooks or online tutorials. They are passed down through the apprentice's interaction with the master blacksmith, a close relationship where the nuance of technique is imparted through direct demonstrations and implicit feedback. There's a certain poetry in the apprenticeship system, in the shared experience of the forge, the passing of secrets whispered amid the clang of the hammer. It's a profound exchange, a connection between generations forged in the heat of the fire. The old ways, however, aren't always easy. The apprenticeships I've personally encountered had their share of moments that were less than ideal. There was, for example, young Barnaby, a lad whose eagerness was matched only by his clumsiness. He possessed boundless energy, yet seemed to lack the most basic dexterity. His attempts at shaping metal were more akin to a child wrestling a wild boar. He burned himself repeatedly, nearly blinded himself on several occasions, and frequently managed to dent or break his own tools with unnerving consistency. His enthusiasm, however, was eventually tempered with skill. Then there was Elsie, the daughter of a local farmer, who initially encountered considerable prejudice in the traditionally male-dominated world of blacksmithing. Yet, Elsie possessed remarkable tenacity and a stubborn refusal to be deterred by the challenges she faced. She learned quickly, her determination surpassing even the gruff Elias. In time, she became a skilled smith, her work characterized by an elegance and precision that belied her initial struggles. Her success served as a powerful testament to the potential of those determined enough to overcome barriers. Each apprentice presented a unique challenge, a different set of skills, abilities, and weaknesses. The task of the master smith wasn't merely to impart technical skills, but to nurture the individual, to recognize their potential, and to guide their development. It was a role that demanded patience, empathy, and a deep understanding of both the craft and human nature. It required a delicate balance between discipline and encouragement, a fine line between driving the apprentice to their limits and avoiding crushing their spirit. The weight of this legacy, the responsibility of preserving a craft that has endured for centuries, is heavy. It's a weight felt not just in the muscles, but in the soul. The fear that the knowledge, the skill, the very essence of the craft might be lost in the modern age is ever present. Yet, in the eyes of my apprentices, in the glimmer of understanding as they finally grasp a technique, in the pride they feel when they forge their first truly successful piece, I find hope. The flame, though threatened, has not been extinguished. The hammer's lament may echo in the past, but the rhythm of its beat continues, carried forward by a new generation, keeping the ancient craft alive, one strike at a time. The art persists, a phoenix rising from the ashes of industry, finding new expression in the hands of those who are determined to continue this essential part of our shared human heritage. The weight of tradition, though heavy, is a weight worth bearing, for within it lies the soul of a craft, a history, a legacy that deserves to live on. Chapter 3: Sparks of Resilience. My hands, they tell a story etched not in ink, but in scars, calluses, and the subtle, persistent ache that never truly leaves. They're a roadmap of a life spent wrestling with molten metal, a testament to the brutal poetry of the blacksmith's trade. They're not pretty, not delicate. They're gnarled and strong, the kind of hands that could crush stone or cradle a newborn with equal ease, though perhaps not with the same tenderness. They've seen more fire than most men, felt more blows than a condemned criminal. Each finger bears its own particular brand of memory. The index finger, perpetually stiff from years of gripping hammer handles, bears a crescent-shaped scar from a particularly enthusiastic encounter with a shower of sparks, a reminder that respect for fire is not a suggestion, but a necessity. My thumb, thick and permanently bowed, speaks of countless hours spent manipulating tongs, twisting and shaping glowing steel. The little finger, slightly shorter than its brethren, thanks to a youthful encounter with a carelessly wielded hammer, serves as a constant, painful reminder of the unforgiving nature of the forge. The rest of my body follows suit. My back, permanently bowed from years spent hunched over the anvil, protests with a symphony of pops and cracks every morning. My arms, thick with muscle memory, are permanently branded with the ghostly etchings of burns, faded reminders of near misses and momentary lapses in concentration. My legs, once strong and resilient, now betray a hint of weariness. The countless hours spent standing on uneven ground, fueling the fire, and hauling heavy materials have taken their toll. My knees groan in protest whenever I kneel, a regular event considering how much time was spent on my hands and knees to tend the forge and move the anvil, which needed to be regularly shifted for a properly aligned work surface. But these scars, these aches, these complaints, they aren't just marks of suffering, they're badges of honor. They are the physical manifestation of a life spent mastering a craft, a testament to the enduring human capacity to endure hardship and emerge stronger, if slightly more creaky, on the other side. In the medieval forge, there was little room for sympathy for sore muscles or blistered hands. The work was unrelenting, the demands relentless. The rhythm of the hammer, the intense heat, the constant strain on the body, it all blurred into a relentless cycle of physical exertion. We worked from dawn until dusk, sometimes longer, fueled by little more than meager rations and a potent brew of sheer stubbornness and determination. Modern blacksmiths, with their pneumatic hammers and power-driven tools, can hardly fathom the sheer physicality of the trade as it was then. Their tools provide much-needed mechanical assistance, which relieves some of the burden, while we relied on nothing but our own physical strength and the endurance gained from years of practice. The difference is palpable. I remember one particular instance, forging a set of plowshares for a particularly cantankerous farmer. The metal was stubborn, the heat intense, and the farmer's complaints were a relentless barrage against my already frayed nerves. It was a day of seemingly endless effort, each blow of the hammer extracting a toll on my already aching body. Yet somewhere within the burning heat of the forge, a strange satisfaction simmered. It was the quiet knowledge that I was shaping not just metal, but destiny. That plowshare, forged in sweat and struggle, would feed families. It was a tangible connection to the fabric of society, a role that transcended the mere creation of inanimate objects. Our work transcended the simple act of shaping metal. It was an integral part of daily medieval life, a cornerstone of the social and economic fabric. Our creations were not just tools, they were life's necessities. From the humble tools of the farmer to the sophisticated weaponry of the knight, our handiwork was essential to their survival and success. This understanding fueled our perseverance and contributed to our sense of importance. We were artisans, yes, but we were also integral components of the society which relied upon our skill. Modern tools, for all their ease and efficiency, lack this profound connection. They streamline the process, removing the need for raw physical strength, but they also seem to strip away the essence of the craft. The intricate dance between man and metal, the visceral connection forged in the heat of the forge, these are aspects that seem to fade with the introduction of mechanized labor. While I recognize the advancements in technology and use some more modern methods in my current workshop, I do sometimes yearn for that primal connection, for the simple, almost brutal struggle of working with the raw material without technological assistance. Consider the sheer weight of the anvil, a solid block of iron that demanded respect. Moving it, adjusting its position, even merely keeping it steady beneath the relentless blows of the hammer. All of these were physical challenges that demanded strength, precision, and unwavering focus. Our posture reflected our work. Years of constant, repetitive work cemented our spines into positions of discomfort, and only time has done anything to relieve the pain. The aches and pains were not something to ignore, because such injuries would severely limit our capabilities and efficiency. Modern blacksmiths have alleviated some of the strain, but the foundational understanding of the raw power involved in our historic trade cannot be overlooked or ignored. The sheer amount of time we spent standing, hunched over the forge, subjected us to the intense heat and the constant strain. Our bodies bear the imprint of this relentless labor. This is not romantic, heroic craftsmanship. This is raw, physical exertion, the kind that leaves you exhausted and aching, but strangely satisfied at the end of the day, because the pain is a reminder of a job well done. In the quiet of the night, when the pain becomes too insistent, I sometimes find myself reminiscing about those years. The memories are a blend of sweat, fire, and the satisfying thud of metal meeting metal, punctuated by the occasional yell, curse, and the inevitable burn. It was a life lived on the edge, a life demanding strength, resilience, and an unwavering dedication to the craft. And it left its mark, a testament not to the frailty of the human body, but to its remarkable capacity to endure and adapt and forge something beautiful and lasting from the raw materials at hand, even when those raw materials include extreme physical exertion. The scars may remain, the aches may linger, but the spirit of the craft, the satisfaction of creation, remains. It is a legacy as hard and unforgiving as the steel we shaped, a legacy that lives on, not just in the tools we created, but in the very fabric of our being. The clang of my hammer was more than just a sound. It was a rhythm that pulsed through the village, a constant reminder of my presence and my trade. It announced my arrival in the morning, punctuated the day's work, and marked the slow descent into evening's quiet. It also served as a potent symbol of my position within the village's social fabric, a mixture of necessity, respect, and begrudging admiration, often in equal measure. My clientele weren't just anonymous faces. They were the backbone of the community, a colorful cast of characters with their own stories, quirks, and demands. There was Old Man Hemlock, the perpetually grumpy farmer whose plowshares I'd reforged more times than I cared to remember, each time accompanied by a torrent of complaints about the price and the quality, despite the fact that I'd always gone the extra mile to ensure his tools were as durable as possible. His complaints were less about the actual work and more about a need to exert his own influence over my actions. Then there was Agnes, the baker whose oven doors I'd repaired countless times, each repair offering a chance for a warm loaf of bread and a brief respite from the relentless heat of my own forge. These exchanges were about more than just professional transactions. They were the subtle threads that wove the tapestry of village life. But my social interactions extended beyond the simple exchange of goods and services. The other tradesmen, particularly the wheelwright and the carpenter, were both competitors and allies. We competed for the same limited pool of customers, inevitably leading to a certain amount of healthy, sometimes less than healthy rivalry. However, the nature of medieval work often demanded collaboration. There were times when the wheelwright needed a specialized piece of metalwork, or the carpenter required a custom-made hinge, and my skills were essential to their success. These collaborations fostered a grudging respect and the subtle understanding that our success was inherently intertwined. A strong community was necessary for the village to thrive, and it was often in our collective interest to keep the peace and support each other's livelihoods. These interactions weren't always amiable. Bartering was a common practice, and negotiations could sometimes become heated. Accusations of shoddy work, disputes over prices, and the occasional threat of violence were just some of the daily flavors of our interactions. My reputation was my greatest asset, and I carefully guarded it, even if it meant going the extra mile to satisfy a difficult client. One time, an argument over the price of a new horseshoe almost escalated into a brawl with a surly stable hand, but the timely intervention of the village elder, a wise old woman with a surprisingly sharp tongue, managed to keep things civil. Such incidents were not uncommon. The village lord, a man whose influence extended to every facet of village life, was a particularly fascinating and occasionally terrifying element of this social equation. His demands were always significant, and my creations were meant to improve or enhance his personal prestige, ranging from decorative ironwork for his manor to weapons for his retinue. His approval, while rarely given openly, was both a source of security and a constant pressure. A misplaced hammer blow could result in a complaint to the Lord, which in turn might lead to unpleasant consequences. The potential repercussions were substantial enough to warrant extreme caution in the quality of my work. Maintaining a good reputation with the Lord was not optional. It was necessary to maintain my position and the livelihoods of the village blacksmith shop. Beyond the immediate circle of my trade, I hid other connections, weaving a social net that extended to the farmers, the weavers, and even the local priest. These relationships were informal but vital. A shared cup of ale at the village tavern could lead to valuable insights into the needs of the community, while a friendly conversation with the priest provided a rare moment of respite and quiet reflection. These quieter interactions were crucial to providing insight into other professions and needs, which allowed me to anticipate the demand for specific items and prepare accordingly. My job was essential to the village, but so was maintaining these friendly relationships, allowing me to predict future needs and adjust my business accordingly. The blacksmith's forge was not merely a place of work. It was a social hub, a place where gossip flowed as freely as molten metal. News and rumors traveled quickly through the village, often finding their way to my ears as I hammered away at the anvil. The forge was a place of conversation, laughter, and the occasional heated argument, a microcosm of the broader village community. It was an essential component of social life within the village and allowed me to build and maintain my social networks. My workspace became a place of trust and a constant reminder of my presence within the village's daily rhythm. Life as a medieval blacksmith was a constant balancing act, a delicate interplay between cooperation and competition, between the demands of work and the intricacies of social life. It was a world where your reputation was your currency, and your relationships were the foundation of your success. While the work was physically demanding and often frustrating, the social aspect provided a necessary counterpoint, offering a sense of belonging and community amidst the heat, the sweat, and the relentless rhythm of the hammer. It was a complex life, with a complex social setting that demanded more than just skill with metal. It demanded a keen understanding of human nature and the ability to navigate the delicate balance between competition and cooperation. There was always a certain risk involved, which was balanced by the rewards of building a stronger village and a more resilient society. It was the essential balancing act needed to survive and thrive in the medieval world. The rhythmic clang of my hammer, a constant companion throughout my days, often drifted into my dreams, a ghostly echo of the forge's relentless heat. But even amidst the rhythmic pounding of steel, my mind often wandered to the stories whispered around the hearth fire, tales of legendary swords and the forgotten smiths who'd forged them. These weren't just idle fancies. They were part of the very fabric of my craft, a connection to a history far older than my own calloused hands. Take, for instance, the sword in the stone, that mythical artifact of Arthurian legend. The image conjures up a romanticized vision of a gleaming blade, effortlessly pulled from its rocky prison, a symbol of destiny and rightful kingship. The reality, however, was likely far less glamorous. The blacksmith who created such a blade, assuming it ever existed outside of storytelling, would have toiled for weeks, maybe months, in the grueling heat of his forge, battling molten metal and temperamental bellows. He'd have sweated, cursed, and likely suffered more than a few burns before finally achieving the desired result. A weapon that was both aesthetically pleasing and, more importantly, capable of cleaving through bone and steel. No knightly glory for him, just the satisfactions of a job well done, perhaps punctuated by a disgruntled customer complaining about the price. Then there's the story of Ulfbert's swords, those enigmatic blades of the Viking Age, renowned for their exceptional quality and seemingly impossible metallurgical prowess. Their secrets are still debated by historians and metallurgists, with theories ranging from advanced crucible techniques to the use of meteorite iron. Regardless of the actual methods employed, the skill of the blacksmiths who created these swords was undeniable. They were masters of their craft, capable of producing blades that were both stronger and sharper than anything their contemporaries could manage. Imagine the dedication required, countless hours spent refining techniques, experimenting with alloys, and constantly pushing the boundaries of what was deemed possible. Their creations weren't merely weapons, they were works of art, symbols of the Vikings' prowess, and a testament to the skill of their craftsmen. These weren't mass-produced, churned out like so many nails. Each one was a unique creation, reflecting the individual skill and artistic vision of its maker. The legends surrounding these swords often overshadow the realities of their creation. The stories highlight the mythical powers associated with the blades, the heroic deeds they enabled, and the figures who wielded them. But lost in the narrative is the often overlooked contribution of the blacksmiths themselves, the unsung heroes of history, toiling anonymously in their sweltering forges, shaping the destiny of nations with their skillful hands. Their names, if they were ever recorded, are largely lost to time. Yet their legacy lives on in the legends surrounding the weapons they crafted. Consider the tales of the Japanese katana, those iconic curved blades celebrated for their sharpness and resilience. The forging process of a katana is a complex and time-consuming ritual, a testament to the dedication and skill of the swordsmiths. The process, involving multiple heat treatments and folding of the steel, was often considered a spiritual practice, blending artistry and craftsmanship in a unique way. The resulting blade is more than a weapon. It is a work of art, reflecting the soul of its creator. Again, the focus often falls on the samurai who wielded the katana, their legendary feats of valor often recounted, but the craftsmen behind these magnificent weapons remain somewhat obscured in the shadows, their contributions often understated or overlooked. Even the more mundane tools of medieval life held a hidden magic, a connection to the skill and artistry of the blacksmith. The humble plowshare, the sturdy axe, the simple hammer, each a testament to the blacksmith's ability to transform raw materials into tools that sustained life. Each strike of the hammer was a small victory, pushing back against the ever-present forces of decay and entropy. While not imbued with the mythic aura of a legendary sword, these tools were the quiet, unassuming heroes of daily life, allowing farmers to cultivate their land and builders to construct their homes. The subtle artistry in shaping each head, balancing weight and form, ensuring long-lasting functionality and ease of use for each user, is a testament to the inherent skill of the blacksmith. And it is this essential role they played, often unseen and uncelebrated, which reminds us of the essential role they played in ensuring the village's survival. The stories of famous swords often serve as a reminder of the crucial role that blacksmiths played in shaping history, influencing battles, and defining cultures. The craftsmanship involved wasn't just about the creation of weapons, it was about the creation of symbols, embodying the power, prestige, and aspirations of the individuals and societies who wielded them. These swords, both real and legendary, became imbued with significance far beyond their mere functional value. They represented ideals of strength, honor, and leadership, and the smith who worked so diligently, sweating and struggling under the intense heat of the forge, played an indispensable role in this creation and the power they eventually represented. The enduring power of these legends highlights the enduring connection between human ingenuity and cultural narratives. The creation of tools and weapons served not just a purely practical role, but also a cultural and symbolic one. The blacksmith, through his skill and dedication, was responsible for bringing these stories to life, ensuring that the weapons which formed the cornerstone of so many heroic narratives held the necessary quality to support the legend. This connection, the subtle link between the maker and the made, is a testament to the lasting impact of the blacksmith's craft. Each strike of the hammer was not just a blow against metal, but a stroke toward shaping the very fabric of history, shaping stories and legends that resonated through the ages. The anonymity of most medieval blacksmiths only serves to amplify the magnitude of their achievements. Their creations, often the focal points of legends and epic narratives, served to ensure their implicit acknowledgement, even if they were not known by name. Lost in the haze of time, their contributions are quietly felt and subtly recognized within the legends and epic stories that endure. This quiet dignity, this persistent presence within history, highlights the vital contributions of these mostly anonymous craftsmen. Their stories may be silent, their names forgotten, but their impact on history, culture, and even the legends themselves is undeniable, shaping the very narrative that we remember and recount. The tales of Excalibur, Durandal, and Joyeuse, and countless others are more than just narratives of heroism and chivalry. They're stories about the men and women who wielded these instruments of power and the blacksmiths who, in their own way, wielded the power to create them. They are tales of sweat, skill, and the surprisingly profound connection between the mundane and the mythical, and that, to me, is a legend worth forging anew with every swing of my hammer. The heat of the forge, the sting of the sparks, the satisfying clang of metal on metal, they're all a part of a tradition as old as storytelling itself, a tradition I'm proud to be a part of, even if my own name will likely be lost to the sands of time, like those who came before me. But then, perhaps anonymity is the ultimate form of immortality for a blacksmith, echoing through the ages in the very legends we forge. The rhythmic clang of the hammer, the hiss of quenching water, the acrid smell of burning coal, the sensory memories etched into my very being after years spent in the forge, are far more vivid than any romanticized notion of the blacksmith's life. Yet, despite the sweat, the strain, and the occasional near miss with molten metal, there's an undeniable allure to the craft, a timeless appeal that transcends centuries. Why, I often wonder, does blacksmithing continue to captivate the imagination, both in its medieval past and in our modern, technologically advanced present? The answer, I suspect, lies not just in the practical utility of the profession, but also in its profound connection to the very essence of human creativity and ingenuity. Blacksmithing at its core is about transformation. It's about taking raw, unyielding materials, iron ore, coal, water, and through skill, patience, and a whole lot of brute force, shaping them into objects of beauty, utility, and sometimes even symbolic power. It is a process that mirrors, in a way, the human journey itself, the refinement of raw potential into something refined, capable, and often unexpectedly beautiful. Think of the humble horseshoe, for instance, a seemingly simple object, yet its creation demands a precision and understanding of metal behavior that would surprise many. The blacksmith must know how to heat the iron to the precise temperature, how to shape it with the hammer, how to ensure a perfect fit for the horse's hoof. It's a process that requires not only physical strength and dexterity, but also an innate understanding of the material's properties, a knowledge gained only through years of experience and countless failures. Yet, the finished product, a seemingly unremarkable horseshoe, is a small testament to the power of human ingenuity, the ability to harness nature's raw materials for the benefit of both horse and rider. The horse's rhythmic hoofbeats become a testament to the silent, often unnoticed contribution of the blacksmith, and the process extends beyond the mundane. The creation of a sword, a tool that has been central to human conflict and culture for millennia, embodies the essence of blacksmithing. To fashion a blade, the smith must not only master the technical aspects of metalworking, heating, hammering, quenching, but also possess a keen sense of artistry, the blade's shape, its balance, its overall aesthetic. These are all crucial elements, demanding an eye for detail and an understanding of the subtle interplay between form and function. This symbiotic relationship between form and function is often overlooked in modern manufacturing. The handmade quality of a well-forged blade cannot be replicated by even the most sophisticated machines. Consider also the intricate designs of medieval gates and hinges. These weren't simply functional elements, but decorative ones, reflecting the wealth and artistry of their owners. The blacksmiths who crafted these pieces weren't merely metal workers, they were artists, incorporating artistic flourishes into their work, their skill transforming the mundane into something truly extraordinary. Imagine the patience and skill required to create something so intricate and long-lasting, a testament to the value placed on the blacksmith's skills. Beyond the artistic merit, the physicality of blacksmithing holds a certain appeal. It's a craft that demands strength, endurance, and a willingness to get dirty, to work with sweat dripping from your brow. In a world increasingly dominated by desk jobs and digital interfaces, there's something profoundly satisfying about the tangible nature of the work, the feel of the hot metal, the rhythmic swing of the hammer, the satisfying clang as the metal takes shape. It's a connection to a primal aspect of human existence, a reminder of our capacity for physical exertion and creative transformation. It's also a tactile connection to the process. The blacksmith becomes intimately acquainted with the material and its reaction to the forging process. This physicality also contributes to the enduring appeal of blacksmithing as a hobby. In our modern world, obsessed with technology, many people seek a more tangible connection to the creation of useful and beautiful objects. The physical act of forging, shaping, and finishing a piece of metal is a deeply rewarding experience. The opportunity to translate a creative vision into a tangible object is inherently attractive to many. The modern blacksmith, equipped with modern safety equipment and better ventilation, can still enjoy the same physical and creative rewards of the craft, eliminating many of the more hazardous aspects of the trade. The continued fascination with blacksmithing also stems from its deep connection to history and tradition. It's a craft that has been passed down through generations, its techniques and secrets carefully guarded and meticulously refined. To work as a blacksmith is to become part of a long and distinguished lineage, to connect to a tradition that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. This historical continuity adds depth and significance to the craft, linking the present-day blacksmith to a rich tapestry of cultural heritage. Moreover, blacksmithing holds a particular place in mythology and folklore, from the legendary swords of Arthurian legend to the mystical blades of Japanese samurai. The blacksmith is often depicted as a figure of immense skill and mystical power. The blacksmith's ability to shape metal also often symbolizes the human ability to shape destiny. The creation of swords, tools, and decorative items was also intimately connected to the symbolic power and beliefs of the societies they served. The blacksmith wasn't simply a metal worker, but also a creator of objects that held both practical and symbolic significance. Despite the romanticized image of the heroic smith, the reality, as I well know, is far less glamorous. The hours are long, the work is strenuous, and the rewards are not always commensurate with the effort involved. There are the burns, the aches, the frustrations of a piece of metal that refuses to cooperate. Yet, these challenges are part of the allure, contributing to the satisfaction of completing a difficult task. It is a challenging occupation that requires perseverance, skill, and a dedication to one's craft. The modern blacksmith can often enjoy a much better work-life balance and less physically demanding work as compared to medieval smiths. However, the inherent satisfaction of transforming raw materials into functional and beautiful objects remains. This is a tangible connection to the creative process, something increasingly scarce in our technologically driven world. It is a connection to the past, to the history of human ingenuity and creativity. It is a timeless craft that continues to captivate and inspire, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and the enduring appeal of fire, hammer, and steel. And perhaps that is the true legacy of fire, the unwavering flame of human creativity burning bright, shaping not only metal, but also our history, our legends, and our future. The last ember glowed a dull red, mirroring the fading light in my own eyes. The forge, usually a maelstrom of heat and clang, was silent, save for the occasional sigh of the cooling bellows. My hands, gnarled and scarred, felt the familiar ache of a long day's work, a sensation as comforting as an old friend. Years of hammering, shaping, and quenching had etched themselves onto my bones as surely as they had onto the countless tools and weapons I'd forged. This wasn't just a workshop, it was a chronicle of my life, written in iron and sweat. Looking back, I've crafted more than just horseshoes and plowshares. I've shaped gates that have weathered centuries of storms, hinges that have creaked open countless doors, and even the occasional sword destined for glory or grimmer fates, a fact that always gave me a touch of morbid amusement. I remember one particularly flamboyant nobleman, Sir Reginald something or other, who insisted on a sword hilt inlaid with amethysts. Amethysts. The man clearly valued show over substance, a common failing among the nobility. He complained endlessly about the cost, naturally. The cost of amethyst, the cost of my time, the cost of my sanity, slowly eroding with each negotiation. I'd wager the sword was more likely to break a nail than an enemy's skull. There were, of course, the less flashy but equally important creations. The simple tools for the farmers, the sickles that brought in the harvest, the axes that felled trees, the sturdy spades that turned the earth. These weren't objects of great beauty, but they were the backbone of the village's survival. Their quiet, unassuming functionality was a source of quiet pride. I never sought fame or fortune, and unlike the knights and lords, my work rarely brought immediate glory. But it fed people, it built homes, it provided for the basic necessities of life. In a way, that quiet practicality felt more significant than the flashy weapons of war. I recall one particularly challenging commission, a set of elaborate ironwork for the town's new church. It was a grueling task, requiring not only skill, but patience. The intricate designs, far beyond anything I had previously attempted, pushed my abilities to their absolute limits. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, spent in the oppressive heat of the forge. My fingers were constantly blistered, my body ached constantly, and my temper flared unpredictably. Several times, I nearly hurled a red-hot piece of metal into the nearby stream in sheer frustration. But I persevered. I had to. The people of the village were placing their faith in me, their trust a silent pressure in my ears. When the ironwork was finally completed and set in place, it was a breathtaking sight. The light catching the intricately wrought iron, the designs shimmering like captured moonlight. The villagers assembled with murmurs of awe, their faces alight with pride. That was my reward, far more fulfilling than any monetary payment could ever be. It was in those moments that I understood the true essence of my work. Blacksmithing, for all its sweat and toil, was a unique expression of my soul. But it wasn't all triumphs, of course. There were failures, too. Blades that snapped under pressure, horseshoes that fell apart, and more than one occasion where I'd nearly lost a finger or two to errant sparks or molten metal. The scars on my hands, once a testament to my skill, now served as grim reminders of those mistakes. Yet these failures, much like the raw iron I worked with, were forged into lessons, shaping my craft and tempering my judgment. Each burn and each misshaped piece of metal was a new insight into the process. The irony of life is that these experiences taught me the essence of resilience. Forging metal was not just about shaping iron. It was about shaping myself. The craft had taught me discipline, patience, and the importance of attention to detail. These qualities weren't just relevant in the forge, they were integral to my life. I learned to deal with frustration, to tolerate discomfort, and to accept that not every piece would emerge perfectly formed. Sometimes, my mistakes only resulted in a crooked nail, but sometimes they could have been catastrophic, if not for a moment of quick thinking. And then there were the people, the villagers, the nobles, the church officials. Each had their own unique personalities and demands. I dealt with demanding customers, hagglers, complainers, and the occasional truly grateful person. I learned to adapt, to deal with diverse personalities, and to balance my own personal convictions with the needs of the community. Dealing with these personalities was in a way the equivalent of working with the different qualities of metal. You had to use different techniques to shape each one. The most difficult aspect wasn't always the physical labor, but the emotional resilience that it required. Dealing with ungrateful clients, dealing with setbacks in the forging process, and dealing with the pressures of the community were a consistent and challenging component of my life as a blacksmith. Many nights were spent not in restful sleep, but in tossing and turning over the day's events. As I surveyed the quiet forge, a wave of melancholy washed over me. The rhythmic clang of the hammer, the hiss of the quenching water, these sounds, once the soundtrack of my life, now felt distant and muted. My days of wielding hammer and tongs were waning, the fire within me slowly diminishing. My legacy, etched in iron, would remain, but my active participation in its continuation would soon end. But I had no regrets. The life of a blacksmith was not for the faint of heart. It was a life of hard work, relentless demands, and occasional moments of sublime satisfaction. But within those challenges lay a profound connection to creation, to history, and to the timeless human spirit. I had played my part in shaping the world around me, one piece of metal at a time. The rhythmic clang of the hammer echoed in the memories of a life forged in fire. And if that's not a testament to a life well lived, then I don't know what is. My work might fade, but the resilience of the human spirit, forged like the finest steel, lives on. The legacy of a smithy is a far stronger thing than a life spent in a padded chair. That is what endures. The end of one cycle is the beginning of another, and even as the embers fade, the memory of the fire remains, a final spark in the darkness.